This is a Dell Optiplex 160L. Launched around the end of 2003, it was a PC that was mostly made for workspaces, not for gaming. But today I want to change that. With this, a GeForce 6200 PCI. It has 256 MB of DDR2 VRAM and a 64-bit memory bus. As you can see, this card isn't the best for games currently, and it never really was. In the year this card launched, which was 2008, games were already demanding the specs of this card as a minimum to run them, besides being limited by the PCI connector, which isn't very fast. And actually, I wanted to get a slightly more powerful card, but every other card from around the time had PCIe or AGP connectors, both ports that are missing from this motherboard. Now, there is just one problem. The PC won't work. Every time I turn it on, it only shows a black screen and nothing else. So the first thing I will do is to fix it. To do so, the first thing I did was to take off the CPU. I remembered that before it stopped working, I had removed it and placed it back. And I was right to think that the problem was here. There were several bent pins on the CPU, which by the way is a 2.8 GHz Pentium 4. This happened because I forgot to raise the lever that CPU sockets have before putting it back in. So I unbent the pins, placed it back, and it turned on. But little did I know this was only the beginning of my problems. After it was back on, it showed an error. Shutdown failure. I started doing some research, and besides being the only person in the internet who had this issue, Dell's official solution was to enter the operating system and run the diagnostic program, thing which if you have this error you can't do. So I started unplugging cables until it worked again. I placed back all the cables one by one to see which one was causing the error, and it was none. It just fixed itself. And well, I mean, I guess that was a little strange, but I won't complain, my PC worked again. The only problem was that it was very slow. But I just told myself, well, the HDD hadn't been used in almost 2 years, it probably just needs a little time to stabilize. So I installed the GPU, the drivers, which took about half an hour, and the games, which ran. Well, saying that they ran is a slight exaggeration, it was more that they were walking. I was barely getting 15 FPS in Half-Life, and it stuttered a lot. And it was a very similar experience in Age of Empires and Doom, a game which can run in basically anything. I was trying out games until my Windows XP installation corrupted. After that I just said, well, I'll just install Windows again. It was probably already corrupted and that is why it was so slow, but this was not the reason. But well, I grabbed my USB with Windows XP, plugged it in to boot with USB, and it gave me a disk error. Soon enough, I discovered that you can't install Windows XP using a USB. Before that, however, I opened my hard drive to see if I could clean it somehow. But at that point, I didn't know that these types of HDDs are very sensitive to air pressure changes inside of them, and opening one up was basically giving it a death sentence. After learning about issues with installing Windows XP through a USB, I started searching for my completely official Windows XP CD. I tried to place it in the disk reader, but it wouldn't open. I kept trying to open it, but nothing I did worked. And I realized why this was later. But for now, I went to search for my other CD drive, which I did find. And it did open its tray, but it wouldn't read the disk. So I went back to the first drive and disassembled it, trying to fix the tray. And it was here where I realized why it wouldn't open. It was because of this piece. This piece is too big to be pushed by a needle, which is the biggest object I have that fits in the cover hole to open the tray. Instead of the piece being pushed, the needle starts drilling onto the piece, and I also realized that the mechanism overall just didn't work very well anymore. Here's a slightly primitive drawing of how this mechanism works. It's not exactly the same as the CD player, but it's similar enough. You see, when you press the eject button, this piece is supposed to be here, touching the gear so that when the motor that moves the gears, which in turn also moves the tray, is activated, this piece moves. Besides, the piece can only move through a lane that the disk tray has, and when the tray closes, the piece also acts as a sort of lock that doesn't let the tray move. The problem is that when the tray closes, The piece doesn't get to the position it's supposed to be at. It should do it using a sort of spring that pushes it into place. But whether it is because of wear or the passing of time, the spring doesn't have enough force to push it fully anymore. Knowing this and that I probably couldn't fix it, I was very close to start looking for another CD drive that worked. But before that, I wanted to try something else. Simply, forcefully open the disk drive and place the disk inside, closing it after, which worked. I was at the Windows XP installer, although the drive was very noisy, and it was so slow. So I waited not one, not two, but 12 hours for Windows XP to completely install. Last time I installed Windows XP was in a laptop 5 years older than this PC, and it only took half an hour, and I was just wondering how this was possible. But anyways, after installing the OS I tried using it and nothing loaded. Absolutely nothing. It was around this time that I realized my mistake of opening up the HDD, and since I didn't have a backup, I started searching for a used one to buy. But in the end, I decided on this SATA to IDE converted to be able to use another SATA drive I already had with this PC. So when I got it, I tried installing Windows XP again, and same thing. Although this time it only took 7 hours instead of 12. An improvement, I suppose. But when I started using it, it was almost just as slow. At this point, I realized that the hard drive probably wasn't the issue. I started suspecting the CPU. Of course, it had had those pins bent for almost 2 years. So I started looking for a replacement for the Pentium 4. Although for some reason all of them were really expensive to be a processor over 20 years old. But while I was doing all this, I realized something. There was a chip that I think are the integrated graphics, but I'm not sure because they're usually inside the CPU that didn't have any thermal paste. I had removed it for whatever reason, so I placed thermal paste on it and my PC wasn't so slow again. I couldn't be angrier and happier at the same time. Because why would something so trivial as a lack of thermal paste have such a big effect on my PC performance? Although I think I may know why. My theory is that because it didn't have good heat conduction to the heatsink, the chip started heating up all of the motherboard, which in turn made all of the components heat up and run slower. But well, now we can finally install the GPU and play some games. First thing I tried was 3DMark06, a benchmark for CPU and GPU capabilities. As the name suggests, this is the 2006 version, 2 years before my GPU launched. To this day, this software still exists, and it has the same purpose. But well, as you can see, it doesn't run great. 1 FPS on average. Also, I mean, really, I was running it with what I think are the highest settings, and I couldn't change it because I had to buy the software itself. So I don't think this is a good reference point for this card. Secondly, I played Half-Life 2. In theory, I only need 128MB of VRAM to run this game, although my GPU had some issues. It almost never got to 60 FPS and at some point some textures got corrupted. But I think that was an issue with the game itself, not by part of the GPU, because I had to find a retail copy of the game that ran under Windows XP since the current Steam version won't run on it, because it requires Steam, which XP no longer supports. Besides, the new Steam version is a slightly updated version that has slightly better graphics and some improvements to run on modern machines. And the copy of the game passed through my main PC to a USB to the PC I'm using right now, so some files might have gotten corrupted. And the third game I tried was The Simpsons Hit and Run, and I was surprised to see how well it ran with this card considering the past 2 tests. It was almost perfect. Of course, it never really ran at 60 FPS, but you could barely notice it. I was able to play some of the game without any issues, and it also looked really neat. Finally, the only game that disappointed me, Doom 3. Apparently the minimum specs to run it were of 64MB of VRAM, but running the game with the lowest settings as you can see here, it didn't run well at all. Sometimes it did run at 60 FPS, but not most of the time. In any case, it was definitely playable. So, was I able to turn this Pentium 4 machine into a 2000's gaming PC? Somewhat. Every game I played was pretty functional with this card, although definitely not perfect. And really, there are a lot of things that could prevent this PC from running them as they should. Maybe it's the CPU, the GPU is already failing, or maybe some components in the motherboard no longer work. In the end, I tried some slightly older games like Half-Life and Unreal, and they ran perfectly. Although I didn't get to record any of them because I get this error now, and I have to fix that now. But well, if you enjoyed the video or it at least entertained you a little bit, I appreciate it if you gave it a like, and maybe even subscribe to my channel. I will keep making videos with similar topics to this, but until then, goodbye.